The ability to create fire has got to be one of mankind's greatest achievements, and knowing how to do so in a survival situation can be the difference between life and death. This video will explore both primitive and modern fire lighting techniques, so make sure you watch until the end to learn something that could just save your life. Throughout history, mankind have used fire for a multitude of reasons, including cooking, warmth, light, to purify water, and even to scare off fearsome predators from entering their prehistoric cave dwellings. But how exactly did our prehistoric ancestors create fire without access to what we, in our modern day lives, take for granted, such as matches or a lighter? Let's start from the beginning and ask ourselves the question, how exactly did a caveman create fire? The archaeological discoveries of human remains and ancient settlements in cave dwellings have shown us that fire was first created by man using one of the most difficult of primitive methods, by striking rocks together to create sparks. But which rocks did they use? Well, there are several rocks that can produce sparks when struck together, but there are two types in particular that were commonly found with prehistoric cave discoveries and are proven to have been used for thousands of years. Those are flint and pyrite, otherwise known as pyrites. When you strike the two together, a very dull spark is created. By dull, I mean a spark that isn't white hot like that of a modern day ferrocium rod, or even a child's sparkler. The key to utilizing these short-lived, low-temperature sparks is to carefully land a spark on a material that will catch and hold the ember for it to then be turned into a flame. It's not as simple as landing the spark on a nest of dried grass and getting an instant flame. Instead, the spark needs to land on something like this, what many of us call a tinder, to then be gently nursed into a nest or tinder bundle and blown into a flame. Tinder can come in many forms, and I'm not referring to the online dating app. Tinder is a natural resource, like a fungus or a tree bark, which can smoulder into a burning hot ember and then be blown into a flame. The fungus I'm using here is just one example of many, and it is something that we know as a fact that mankind has used for many thousands of years. This is called amadou. Amadou is a layer within the horse's hoof fungus, commonly found on old beech trees, which, when extracted, beaten and scraped, forms a material similar to suede. If you've ever heard of Ötzi the Iceman, the naturally mummified remains of a prehistoric man who lived sometime between 3350 BC and 3105 BC, which were discovered in September 1991 in the Ötztal Alps, then you will probably be aware that found amongst his possessions were several pieces of amadou carried in his tinder pouch. Other tinders, such as these black balls, which are in fact another species of fungus, are great for firelighting. They go by several commonly known names, but most of us know them as cramp balls, or King Alfred cakes, or perhaps their Latin name, Daldenia concentrica. They form on dead or decaying trees like ash, and are a great tinder resource. We'll explore these a little later in this video. Another commonly used method to create fire is friction. By friction, I mean fire by friction, the process of rubbing wood objects against each other for long enough to create a smouldering ember. Fire by friction is almost always done using wood, and most importantly, dead dried wood. But figuring out the correct combinations of wood is the difference between creating a smouldering ember and a pile of useless dust. This is the rather large subject, but we will focus on the most commonly known and used methods, the bow drill and the hand drill. The bow drill is something we probably have all seen, whether that be in YouTube videos, television programs, or in real life. But the reality is that very few of us have ever tried it, and even fewer have been successful with it. It's the act of drilling a wooden spindle into a hearthboard to create a build-up of hot dust, which will then turn into a smouldering ember, to then be transferred into a tinder bundle. The main components for a bow drill are a bow, cordage, a spindle, a hearth, and a bearing block. The spindle is wrapped around the cordage and then inserted into the hearth, which has a pre-cut notch, before the drilling process commences. But this would be useless without the downward force provided by what we call a bearing block. One very important factor with the bow drill is the string or cordage used to oscillate the spindle. Both historical discoveries and modern day experimentation has proven that materials such as twisted fibers, tree roots, or even strips of rawhide can be used as cordage. But these days many people use a modern cordage such as a shoelace or a length of paracord. In this clip I'm using paracord and have replaced the wood bearing block with something that provides even less resistance: limpet shells. The idea of using a shell is to reduce unnecessary friction created between the bearing block and spindle, ensuring the bulk of the friction is in effect between the spindle and hearth. Bones and stones with a shallow hole are other smooth alternatives to reduce friction. Have you ever created fire by friction using a bow drill or hand drill? Let me know in the comments section, and in particular let me know your favourite wood combinations. For a more in-depth video on bow drill, please have a look through my videos where you will find a dedicated video on the bow drill. A more primitive version of the bow drill is the hand drill, which requires a little more skill, patience and stamina. This method of creating fire is similar to the bow drill but uses only two components: the spindle and hearth. For this to work, the spindle must be a long length of wood with a somewhat thinner diameter. This allows you to drill pressing from the top down, which allows you to not only oscillate the spindle but also create a constant focused downward pressure onto the hearth board. Remember the fire we created using flint and pyrite? Well, now let's look into a more modern version of that, the flint and steel. Striking together flint and steel is a primitive fire making technique dating back into the Iron Age, when steel was first available for this simple and quite effective technique. It was frequently used until more recent years when matches were invented, making the flint and steel method for most part obsolete. When steel is struck against a hard material such as flint, it causes minute sparks of steel to fly through the air. These sparks are whiter in colour, meaning they are hotter than the sparks created by flint and pyrite. These hot sparks will ignite your tinder more easily and are substantially easier to use than those of the flint and pyrite. Having covered flint and pyrite and the methods of flint and steel, let's look at the most modern version of this, the fire steel, otherwise known as the ferrocium rod. Fire steels are a larger version of what you can find in modern day lighters and are an alloy of various igneous metals combined into a single piece of metal, which, when scraped, can produce a burst of white hot sparks. The best material to use with a fire steel is a form of carbon steel, but a piece of natural flint or even a piece of broken glass can be used to create sparks. You will quite often see these fire steels come with a carbon striker, but I like to use the back of my knife as my fire steel is usually attached to the sheath of my knife. Unlike the flint and pyrite and flint and steel, these modern day fire steels create sparks hot enough to turn a simple nest of dry tinder directly into a flame. Earlier in the video we delved into the world of fire by friction. Well, let's bring that topic back up and explore something of a more modern discovery, the fire roll. There is no evidence to suggest this is a primitive method to create fire, but this is a technique that requires very little skill and is a great way to impress your friends the next time you have a social gathering. By using two simple materials, those being cotton wool and some ash from a previous fire. To do this, you will need to sprinkle some ash onto a flattened cotton ball before rolling it between two flat surfaces for approximately 20 to 30 seconds. What happens is the friction created from the minute pieces of char within the ash will heat up enough for the material to begin to smoulder into an ember, which can then be transferred into a tinder nest of some sort. Other materials to replace the cotton ball include coconut fibres, wild clematis, milkweed, dandelion, thistle, cedar bark, and various others. And instead of using ash as a filler, you can use rust shavings, sand, black pepper, coffee, and various others. So what other methods are there which can be used to create fire in a survival situation? How about something as simple as a piece of broken glass or even a plastic bag? Glass can be used much like a magnifying lens would be. Holding a piece of broken glass to the sunlight and carefully angling it will allow you to focus the sun's rays into a concentrated area, which can then be focused onto a tinder. Tinders like coconut husk fibres, dried grass, or some types of fungi, like the previous mentioned Daldinia concentrica, will quite easily absorb the heat produced from the focused rays and either turn into a flame or a smouldering material which can then be, once again, blown into a flame. Believe it or not, we can use a plastic bag filled with water to create another effective solar lens. Okay, now let's think about the following situation. We're in a survival situation where we need to create a fire but have nothing other than a lighter that no longer has any gas. It's completely empty and we don't have any tinder at all. The only part of the lighter that works is the flint spark. The trick here is to create a small pile of shavings by scraping the plastic and then covering with a fine dust of flint shavings. What I mean by flint is not the natural flint we discussed earlier, but the mini fire steel we often refer to as the lighter flint. By creating a layer of dust from flint shavings above the plastic shavings, we can create a hot spark using the remainder of the flint, which causes the dust to spontaneously combust and turn the whole pile into a flame. Okay, now for my last tip. I want to mention something we are all familiar with, especially in recent years: hand sanitizing gel. Hand sanitizing gel contains alcohol, which can be really helpful for getting your fire started when times are tough, such as on a windy day or if our tinder is slightly wet or damp. Did you know that you can ignite a drop of hand sanitizer with sparks from a fire steel? Why not give this a try for yourselves and let me know if it worked in the comment section. To conclude this video, I would like to add that knowing how to create fire in whatever situation you may find yourself in could be the difference between life and death. But the key is knowledge and practice, and as with all bushcraft and survival skills, it's a matter of the more you know, the less you need to carry. I would like to encourage you to take on board all the information presented in this video and to practice it for yourselves. With practice comes skill, which in turn results in a higher chance of lighting that fire when you most need it. It's a huge subject and this video just scratches the surface. Please let me know if you found this video useful by hitting the like button, and let me know in the comments section which method you find the most interesting and which method you would like me to explore in more detail.